Marissa woke to a heavy gray morning, the sky outside a dull smear against the penthouse windows. Every muscle in her body ached from tension, from the sleepless hours spent staring at the ceiling, replaying every look, every word, every silence between her and Leon. She had to be smarter. Had to stop flinching at the small glimpses of humanity he let slip. He might look exhausted. He might say, "Please," in a moment of weakness. But none of that erased the truth sitting heavy in the bottom drawer of her vanity. The ownership transfer, the death clause. The man she had married, however beautiful, however complicated, had signed her death warrant, and the clock was ticking. Marissa needed answers, real ones, not the polished lies Leon fed the world. She started small. Every morning, after Leon left for work, she explored the penthouse methodically, the office, the library, the wine cellar, careful to leave no trace. At first, she found nothing. Everything was scrubbed clean, clinical. Contracts filed perfectly. Business reports stacked with military precision. But one afternoon, tucked behind a row of untouched first editions in the library, she found a single worn folder. No monogram, no corporate branding, just a simple label, handwritten in clean block letters. Eleanor Marquette. Leon's mother. Marissa's breath caught. She sat down on the floor, folder trembling in her hands. Inside were clippings, decades old, of newspaper articles, hospital records, private letters. A portrait of tragedy, pieced together in scraps. Eleanor Marquette had been a beloved figure in her time, a philanthropist, a fierce advocate for women's education, a woman who had quietly built her own fortune even as her husband ran the Marquette Corporation. And then, at the height of her influence, she had died. A tragic accident, the headlines said. A car crash on a rain-slicked road, no foul play suspected. But the hospital report tucked at the back of the folder told a different story. Injuries inconsistent with a simple crash, bruises that didn't match the seatbelt pattern. Toxicology screens conveniently misplaced. The official narrative didn't add up. And worse, right after Eleanor's death, her personal assets had been quietly absorbed into the Marquette Corporation. Marissa closed her eyes, a wave of nausea rolling over her. This wasn't just about greed. It was a pattern. Marissa was never meant to be Leon's partner. She was meant to be his next Eleanor. She slammed the folder shut, heart hammering. She needed to get out. She needed air. The Marquette Foundation Charity Gala was that night, a sprawling, glittering event held in the city's grandest hotel ballroom. Leon's presence was mandatory. So was hers. Marissa wore a dark green velvet gown that hugged her frame, her hair pinned into an elegant knot at the base of her neck. Polished, controlled, a perfect mask for the war raging inside her. Leon waited for her in the foyer, dressed in a black tuxedo, his cufflinks gleaming like twin shards of ice. He didn't say anything when he saw her, didn't compliment her appearance, didn't even blink. But something shifted almost imperceptibly in his posture, a tightening of his jaw, a flicker in his eyes. He offered his arm. Marissa hesitated, just for a heartbeat, before sliding her hand into the crook of his elbow. His touch was warm, solid, dangerous. They moved through the hotel lobby together, every gaze snapping toward them, a prince and his queen, poised and untouchable. If only they knew. At the gala, Marissa smiled until her face hurt, danced with investors, posed for endless photographs. Leon stayed close but distant, his hand occasionally brushing the small of her back, his presence a constant, heavy shadow. Hours later, when the main event ended, she found herself alone near the terrace doors, gulping in the cool night air. She wasn't surprised when Leon appeared beside her. "You're doing well," he said, his voice low. "Better than I expected." "Funny," she said lightly, keeping her gaze on the dark skyline. "I could say the same about you." A silence stretched between them, something heavy, fragile. Leon shifted, standing closer than propriety demanded. When he spoke again, his voice was rougher, like it cost him something. "I know you don't trust me." Marissa turned to look at him fully for the first time that night. The moonlight carved shadows into the planes of his face, highlighting the faint scar above his left brow, one she hadn't noticed before. A souvenir from some other war, some other betrayal. "You haven't exactly given me a reason to," she said quietly. Leon's mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. "No," he agreed. "I suppose I haven't." He looked down at his hands, strong, elegant, capable of both tenderness and violence. "There are things you don't know, Marissa," he said. Things I can't tell you. A bitter laugh escaped her. That's convenient. He stepped closer, so close she could feel the heat radiating off him. I'm not the monster you think I am, Leon said. And God help her, part of her wanted to believe it. But she remembered Eleanor's folder, the bruises, the missing toxicology reports. Marissa forced herself to hold his gaze, even as her heart cracked a little inside her chest. Maybe not, she said softly. But you're not a savior either. They returned to the penthouse in silence. Leon poured himself a drink, nursing it in the dark kitchen while she changed out of her gown, her hands trembling. When she returned barefoot in a simple silk robe, he was still there, standing in the shadows like a ghost. Good night, Leon, she said, voice steady. He looked at her for a long, long moment. Then he said something that made her heart stumble painfully in her chest. You should be careful, Marissa, he said quietly. There are worse things out there than me. And, for once, terrifyingly, she believed him. That night, Marissa lay awake again, staring at the ceiling. Her mind churned. If Leon wasn't the only danger, if something bigger, older, more poisonous was festering beneath the surface, then running away might not be enough. She needed to understand the full picture. She needed to know what she was really fighting. Because if Eleanor's death was just the beginning, then Marissa Hale Marquette might be standing at the edge of a storm far deadlier than she had ever imagined. And the only man who could help her survive it was the one she couldn't afford to trust. 3 weeks passed, 3 weeks of pretending, of balancing on the razor's edge between wife and enemy, of lying beside a man whose very existence both fascinated and terrified her. Marissa learned to move through her days like a ghost. She smiled at charity board meetings, charmed investors at luncheons, played the part of the devoted wife at public functions. But in the stolen moments, when Leon was absorbed in conference calls, when the penthouse was silent and heavy with absence, she dug deeper. The more she uncovered, the more the picture shifted, tilted, fractured. It wasn't just Leon. It was his entire world. The Marquette Corporation wasn't simply ruthless in business. It was built on blood and betrayal. Old court cases buried in obscure archives, former executives who vanished quietly after disputes, whistleblowers who withdrew accusations without explanation or simply disappeared. A network of silence and fear that stretched back decades. And the more Marissa learned, the more she realized. Leon wasn't the architect of this empire. He was its prisoner, and perhaps, just perhaps, its next casualty. The discovery unsettled her more than she wanted to admit, because if Leon was trapped, if he was simply surviving a legacy he hadn't chosen, then maybe he wasn't planning to kill her out of cold ambition. Maybe he was being forced. The idea rattled around in her mind like a live wire, sparking dangerous hope. Hope she tried and failed to smother. One evening, after a grueling charity auction, they returned to the penthouse later than usual. Marissa peeled off her heels in the foyer, wincing at the blisters forming on her heels. Leon watched her from the threshold, still in his tuxedo, his tie loosened, shirt unbuttoned at the collar. Disarmed. Human. You're bleeding, he said quietly. She glanced down. A thin line of crimson marred her ankle. It's nothing, she muttered, brushing past him, but Leon caught her wrist. Not hard, just enough to make her still. Sit down, he said, his voice low, unreadable. She opened her mouth to protest, then closed it, too exhausted to argue. Wordlessly, she sank onto the edge of the leather sofa. Leon disappeared into the kitchen, returning moments later with a small first aid kit. He knelt in front of her, a powerful man brought to his knees, and cleaned the wound with surprising gentleness. The room was too quiet. Every brush of his fingers against her skin sent little shocks up her spine. Marissa clenched her hands in her lap, desperate to stay still. This isn't necessary, she said hoarsely. Leon didn't look up. Maybe not, he said, but it's what you do when someone's hurting. The words hit her harder than they should have. She stared at him, at the man who could destroy her, save her, or break her heart, and felt something dangerous slip through her defenses. Not love, not yet, but something close enough to terrify her. Later, when he finally rose to his feet, Leon lingered. His hand brushed against her cheek, almost hesitantly. Marissa, he said, and her name sounded different in his mouth, softer, broken somehow. But whatever he was about to say dissolved into silence. He shook his head, stepping back. The wall slammed back into place between them. Without another word, Leon retreated to his study, the door closing with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot. Marissa sat frozen on the sofa, her ankle bandaged, her heart in ruins. The next day, Marissa made a decision. She needed to know why. Why he had agreed to marry her. Why he had signed a contract that sealed both their fates. Why, despite everything, he seemed to be drowning right alongside her. There was only one place she could find answers now: his past. Not the version he presented to the world. The polished resume, the spotless public record. The real past. The boy before the empire. The son before the corporation. Marissa enlisted the help of someone she knew Leon would never suspect. Caroline, the penthouse housekeeper. A kind woman in her late 50s, Caroline had been with the Marquettes for over 20 years. She had seen Leon grow from a boy into a man. "Mrs. Marquette," Caroline said gently when Marissa cornered her in the laundry room that afternoon, "you don't need to look into the past. It won't help you." "I need to understand," Marissa whispered. "I need to know what he's capable of." Caroline hesitated, then, after a long silence, something that made the hair on Marissa's arms stand on end. "He's not the monster," Caroline said quietly. "He's the sacrifice." Marissa stared at her, pulse thundering. "What do you mean?" Caroline only shook her head, eyes glistening with something too raw to name. "You'll see," she said. "Soon enough." That night, Marissa found a keycard slipped under her bedroom door. No note, no signature. Just a simple card embossed with the Marquette crest, and a scrawled line in ink across the back: "Storage level 3, midnight. Come alone." Marissa stared at the card for a long time, her mind racing. A trap? Maybe. But if there was even a sliver of a chance she could uncover the truth, she had to take it. Because the longer she stayed in this marriage, the clearer one truth became. She wasn't just fighting for her life anymore. She was fighting for her heart. And terrifyingly, disastrously, she realized she was losing it to a man she might still have to destroy. The elevator creaked and groaned as it descended toward the forbidden levels beneath the Marquette building. Marissa clutched the keycard in her hand, the ridges of the embossed crest digging into her skin. Storage level 3, midnight. Come alone. Her heart thudded a painful rhythm against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, but her anger, her fear, her desperate need to understand what Leon truly was, or wasn't, propelled her forward. The elevator doors opened with a soft hiss. Dim emergency lights cast eerie shadows down the concrete hallway. The air smelled of damp paper and rust. No guards. No cameras. No sign of life. Marissa stepped out, her heels clicking quietly against the floor. The silence was suffocating. Doors lined the hallway, some padlocked, others simply marked with numbers. But at the very end of the corridor, one door stood slightly ajar. It was waiting for her. Inside, it wasn't what she expected. No secret vault, no weapons, no criminal evidence, just an old, dust-choked archive room. And in the center, a battered filing cabinet like its drawers hanging open. Someone had left a single file on the desk. Her name wasn't on it. Leon's was. Leon Alexander Marquette, confidential custodial guardianship documentation. Frowning, Marissa flipped it open, and her breath hitched. Inside were documents detailing Leon's life, starting from when he was just 5 years old. Custody battles, psychological evaluations, medical reports. There were transcripts of therapy sessions. Raw, brutal things, describing a small boy withdrawn, terrified of his own father, desperate to protect a mother who couldn't protect herself. One entry chilled her to the bone. Leon displays a hyper-awareness of adult emotions, particularly fear. He often takes responsibility for the violence inflicted upon him and his mother, displaying guilt patterns typically associated with survivors of domestic abuse. Marissa's hands trembled. The Leon she knew, the cold, lethal man, had been forged in fire. He hadn't been born ruthless. He had been broken into it. At the bottom of the file was a more recent document, a contract, not the marriage contract she had signed, a different one. This one had been signed before she ever entered his life, between Leon and his uncle, Charles Marquette, the true chairman behind the scenes. The language was clear and brutal. Leon was to marry a woman from a strategic family, any suitable candidate, within a set time frame. If he refused, certain trust funds and family debts tied to his mother's estate would be resolved in ways that would bankrupt her charitable foundations and erase her legacy. In other words, marry, obey, or watch everything his mother built burn. Marissa staggered back from the desk, nausea rising in her throat. Leon hadn't chosen her out of ambition. He hadn't lured her into marriage to consolidate power. He had been cornered, threatened, forced. And if she was reading between the lines correctly, the clause about the transfer of assets upon unfortunate demise wasn't his idea either. It was Charles's. Leon was just the weapon. And now she was the target he'd been forced to aim at. The door creaked. Marissa whirled around, her heart crashing against her ribs. Leon stood there, dark suit, no tie, the shadows pooling under his eyes deeper than ever, his gaze locked onto the file in her hand. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, quietly, wearily, Leon stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. "I told you," he said, voice raw, "there are worse monsters than me." Marissa couldn't breathe. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. Leon laughed, a broken, hollow sound. "Tell you what, Marissa? That my family owns me? That they turned me into a weapon? That I'm not the executioner you should fear, but the blade they keep sharpening?" His voice cracked. His mask was slipping, and underneath it there was a man drowning in guilt and exhaustion, and something else too terrifying to name. "Hope. Maybe I thought," he said bitterly, "if I kept you at a distance you'd hate me enough to leave, before it was too late." "But you didn't let me leave," she said, hating how her voice shook. "No," Leon said. "I'm a selfish bastard. I wanted..." He cut himself off, running a hand through his hair. "I wanted someone to look at me without flinching," he said finally. "Even if it was a lie." Marissa's throat burned. "You don't have to kill me," she said. Leon's eyes shuddered. "You don't understand. If I don't, they'll destroy you anyway, in ways you can't imagine." "They don't have to know," she said, stepping closer despite every alarm in her body screaming at her to stay away. "We can find a way out." Leon smiled, a real one, jagged and sad and unbearably beautiful. "You still don't get it," he murmured. "There's no out. Not for people like us." "But," he silenced her with a look, "the contract ends one way or another," he said. "My death or yours." Something inside Marissa broke wide open, and in that shattered space, something new took root. Not trust, not forgiveness, but a desperate, defiant kind of loyalty. She crossed the distance between them, slowly, deliberately, until she stood close enough to feel the heat of his body. "You're wrong," she said fiercely. "We choose how this ends." Leon stared at her like he was seeing a ghost, a memory, a miracle. "You're playing a dangerous game, Marissa," he warned, voice a hoarse whisper. "So are you," she breathed. For one suspended heartbeat, they hovered there, two broken people on the edge of ruin, and the space between them cracked and dissolved. Leon reached out, his fingers brushing her jaw, tentative, reverent. Marissa didn't move away, didn't flinch. She leaned into him, into the danger, into the heartbreak, into the only thing real between them anymore. And for the first time since the day they signed their cold, emotionless contract, Leon Marquette kissed her. The following morning, after their shared moment of clarity and understanding, the weight of what they were about to do settled over them. There was no turning back. The truth about Leon's forced marriage, about Charles's betrayal, it had all come to a head. But despite the clarity, there was fear. They were going up against a man who controlled more than just a company. He controlled the lives of everyone in the Marquette empire. He had money, influence, and connections. He had orchestrated everything from behind the scenes for decades, manipulating everyone in his path. Defeating him wasn't just about legal papers or contracts. It was a battle for their lives. Marissa and Leon sat together in his penthouse, going over their plan once more. Every detail had to be flawless. There couldn't be any mistakes. Charles had eyes everywhere, and he would not go down without a fight. Leon's face was grim as he glanced at Marissa. "We can't let him get away with it, Marissa. We can't just hand him control over everything again." She nodded, her mind racing through their options. The truth was, they had been planning this for weeks now, trying to piece together every shred of evidence that would bring Charles to his knees. But they couldn't trust anyone. Even the most loyal employees in the Marquette company might be in Charles's pocket. So they had to be smart. They had to be strategic. Marissa had reached out to a few old contacts of hers, people she knew from her family's business dealings who could help them move quietly in the shadows. They had gathered enough to begin the battle, but the final blow had to come from a place where Charles least expected it. The meeting was set. Leon's lawyer had arranged a final consultation with Charles, positioned as a last-minute negotiation. In reality, it was a setup, but they couldn't afford to show their hand too early. They had to play this like a game of chess. One wrong move, and everything could collapse. Leon and Marissa entered the sleek, cold boardroom, the tension thick in the air. The massive glass windows on the far side of the room offered a panoramic view of the city, but neither of them were looking at the view. They were focused on the man sitting at the head of the table, Charles Marquette, wearing his usual smug expression. Charles barely acknowledged their entrance. He was more interested in the papers in front of him, as if he didn't even consider them a threat. "You're late," he remarked coldly, eyes not leaving the document he was reviewing. Leon's posture was rigid, but his eyes were burning with the quiet fury that had been growing inside him for years. He sat down across from Charles, the air crackling between them. "We've come to discuss our terms, Charles, the terms that will change everything." Charles looked up slowly, his gaze sharpening. "And what exactly is that? You think you can win this? You think the board will just fall in line with whatever lies you've concocted?" Leon didn't flinch. "I'm not here to talk about lies, Charles. I'm here to talk about the truth you've been hiding for decades." Charles leaned back in his chair, a smile playing on his lips as if he had all the time in the world. "I see you've been talking to the wrong people, Leon. Do you really think you're in control now? You've made a mistake, and I'm about to show you just how far you've fallen." But Leon didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he nodded at Marissa, who had been standing quietly beside him. She moved, sliding a folder across the table toward Charles. Charles eyed it warily. "What's this?" "Evidence," she said, her voice steady, but there was a quiet strength in it that seemed to shake him for just a second. "Evidence that proves you've been embezzling funds from the Marquette accounts. Evidence that shows you've been manipulating the board, using threats and intimidation to get what you want. And most importantly, evidence that shows you planned to kill Leon to take full control." Charles's eyes narrowed. "You don't have the guts to use that against me." Marissa took a deep breath. "I don't need guts. I just need the truth. And I have the truth, Charles. And soon, everyone will know it." Leon stood, his voice cutting through the tense silence like a blade. "We have proof of your under-the-table dealings, your threats to my mother's legacy, and your plans to destroy Marissa's family business. If you make one wrong move, we'll expose everything. Your empire will come crashing down." For a moment, Charles said nothing. His eyes flicked between them, calculating. Then, with a sickening calm, he smiled. "You think this is over? You think you've won?" He chuckled darkly, shaking his head. "You really are naive, Leon. Do you think I haven't thought of every possibility? Do you think I didn't have a contingency plan for when you tried something like this?" Leon tensed, but Marissa stepped forward, her gaze fierce. "We know about the offshore accounts, the secret transactions. You've already been reported to the authorities. There's no escape this time, Charles. You're finished." For the first time, Charles's confident mask slipped. His hand trembled as he reached for the folder, flipping through the pages, realizing that the documents they had, the bank records, the emails, the recordings, were real. They were airtight. But then, as if realizing he was out of moves, Charles's expression hardened. "You think you can win?" he sneered. "I'll have you both destroyed before you even make it out of this room." But just as he reached for his phone, intending to call for backup, Marissa took a step forward and placed a phone on the table. Leon's eyes flicked to it, and he understood instantly. "Not today," she said quietly. "That phone is already recording. Everything you say, everything you do from now on is on the record. We've already sent this to the authorities. If you try to make a move, your entire operation will implode." Charles froze. His fingers hovered over his phone, but the gravity of the situation seemed to hit him in that moment. The walls were closing in. He was trapped. "You're finished," Leon said again, but this time there was no hesitation in his voice. "And you won't be able to hide behind your money or your power anymore." Charles's face twisted with rage, but he said nothing more. The silence in the room felt suffocating, but it was a silence that marked the end of his reign. Later that night, Charles was arrested. The authorities moved swiftly, seizing his assets and freezing all his accounts. The media stormed his office, capturing his downfall in real time, and the board of Marquette Industries swiftly voted to oust him from his position. The weight of his crimes became public knowledge, and the empire he had built was left in ruins. Leon and Marissa watched it all unfold from the safety of their penthouse, the tension between them finally easing as the final pieces of the puzzle fell into place. They had won. They had defeated Charles, not just with their courage, but with the truth. Weeks later, they sat side by side, watching the city lights twinkle below. The storm had passed, and now the future was theirs to shape. Leon turned to Marissa, his expression softer now, the lines of tension finally leaving his face. "We did it," he said quietly, as if still processing everything. Marissa smiled, her hand finding his. "Together. We did it together." And for the first time, as they looked toward the future, they both knew one thing for certain. No one could break them. Not anymore. And so their journey reaches a turning point. With betrayal, secrets, and love now interwoven into the fabric of their lives, Marissa and Leon are left to navigate a world where trust is fragile, and every decision could lead to devastation or salvation. Make sure to subscribe for the next installment of the Marriage Contract. You won't want to miss what happens next.